Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So before this video starts, there are a couple of people a few people that I wanted to thank for the event. First of all, Brother Asadullah, of course, for coming up to Columbus to give such an amazing talk. Then I wanted to thank my MSA board, particularly Nida Tufani and my co-chair Salma Shire. Then I wanted to thank Brother Abdullah Andalusi for recommending such a good speaker from the Muslim Debate Initiative. Next, I wanted to talk about the events that happened prior to the recording of the video. So first, we played one of Vidu Vid's videos about why Muslims interpret the Quran very, very selectively. And then we had Brother Asadullah's response to that video, which was like a parody of that one. Then we brought Brother Asadullah up and asked him why he created that video and why he has this YouTube channel there in the first place. You guys, this is already on his YouTube channel. You guys are pretty familiar with that. Then we broke for Maghrib. After we broke for Maghrib, we brought Brother Asadullah back up, and we talked about the reasons why he became Muslim. Among the reasons which at least I found interesting was his previous family was also Muslim, and this gave him an emotional push to make the decision to become Muslim as well. After which I got into character and I told him that his decision was wrong, right? Even though I'm Muslim, I adopted this one character. So you'll see that throughout the video, I keep on poking him, I try to challenge him, I try to make fun of him a little bit, just to keep it like lively, try to keep it fun. And then afterwards, oh yeah, by the way, the first question is, why did the Prophet marry a 9-year-old? So keeping all that in context, enjoy.
Their parents had to go through very similar circumstances. You know, the whole age thing, you know, we're talking about maturity now at 18 or up, is really very recent. It's only the past 100 years or so. Okay, so our grandparents didn't understand this concept very well. They formed that love while they were in the relationship. They didn't just suddenly jump into it, you know, from that perspective. So this is a very recent thing for us. And yeah, they didn't have many options back then. So this whole idea that, oh, because this person's 20 years or 30 years old, they didn't care. The guy's alive. That's what they were. I'm serious, right? The guy's alive. He's got money. He hasn't been killed yet. You know, I mean, that was a great catch back then. I mean, I'm serious, right? You think that's nonsense, but that's really what they were worried about. You know, to think that they were, oh, is this guy handsome? You know, is he a good talker? They didn't care. Anyways.
So I got another question for you about Islam and why I don't like it.
Okay, go ahead. Okay. Question answered, by the way, at the end. If you guys want to hold your questions, we'll go at it. Don't worry.
So I think I'm not stupid. Okay, I'm smart.
Oh yeah.
So you have this life, okay?
Yeah.
It's finite. You can do as many sins as you want in this life, and it's gonna be finite.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
But is hell finite?
No.
Or is it infinite? Or is it everlasting?
It's everlasting.
Then how does that make sense?
What are you talking about?
I'm smart.
Okay, so what are you saying? You're saying that there's a problem with eternal hellfire for a finite amount of sins?
Yep.
Okay, well, what if I told you that in Islam, the reason that you're in hellfire forever is because your sin is forever? Is committed continuously over and over and over and over again.
How? Life is finite.
Okay, so anybody can read for me Quran Surah 6, ayah 27 to 28, please?
Where's the sin?
I'll do this.
Translation preferably for those who do not speak Arabic.
You said number 27?
And 28, please. I just want to have somebody read that real quick and I'll explain it.
So what's surah again?
Surah 6, ayah 27 to 28.
If you could but see when they are made to stand before the fire, and will say, "Oh, would that we could be returned (brackets) to the life on earth (bracket) and not deny the signs of our Lord and be among the believers." But what they concealed before them has bracket now, bracket, appear to them, and even if they were returned, they would return to that which they were forbidden, and indeed they are liars.
Okay, so there's a scene here where he's facing the hellfire, and he asks Allah, hey, I'm paraphrasing, he's saying, look, I feel bad for what I did, can you send me back so I can do some good deeds and come and get into Jannah? And Allah says, I know for a fact that when you go back, you're going to do the exact same thing. So you're lying. Now, what does this mean? Well, there are numerous passages in the Quran that talk about the kuffar and what happens when they're in hellfire. And Allah calls them a certain name or He says something about them every single time. He says one thing about them. He says they're arrogant. He also says hellfire is for the arrogant. So what does this mean? He's talking specifically to individuals who know that Allah exists, who know what Allah wants, who know that they shouldn't be doing certain things, but regardless of that, they refuse to submit because of their arrogance. They refuse, even if they're standing before the hellfire, the only reason they want to get out is not because they want to submit to the truth or to God's guidance, it's because they just don't want to deal with it, they want to deal with the punishment, okay? So they continuously commit the sin of not wanting to submit to God. So their sin is eternal, not in quality, but also in quantity. They literally refuse. That's why when Allah calls them out, He's saying to them, you are lying. I know for a fact that you're making an excuse. You don't actually want to repent. And that's why He keeps them there. Allah is not keeping them there. It's their pride that's keeping them there. Now there's an interesting story. So actually, before we get into that, there are other passages in the Quran where the same conversation occurs. And in fact, when these people, these particular kuffar are being dragged into the hellfire, they're repeating something. If anybody knows what that is? They said, we did nothing wrong. We did nothing wrong. They're telling Allah, the omniscient, the one who knows everything, the one who created morality, they're telling Him that He's wrong. Okay? They're not admitting that they've done anything. They literally think they are perfect, they are sinless. All right, that is the type of arrogance that we're discussing here. Now, some may retort and say, well, it's just any disbeliever that's being thrown in hellfire. That's not necessarily true. Iblis, Shaitan, what was he called when he refused to submit to Allah's command? He became one of the disbelievers. He knows Allah exists. It's not like he doesn't know. I mean, of course, he was one of the closest beings to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yet he is called a kafir. Interesting, right? And there's a lovely story that my sheikh told me. I don't know if it's canonical or anything like this, but I think it's derived from a hadith, but it's not exactly what it is. It may have been just something that was passed down by scholars, but anyway, so this beautiful story about 3 people who were sent to hellfire. And so the first person came in, and Allah commanded him to be thrown into the hellfire. So the angels had to drag him in. He was kicking and screaming, saying, I didn't do anything wrong. They threw him in. Second person came in, and Allah commanded him to be thrown into hellfire. And the angels were about to take him, and he said, no, I'll go in myself. So he walked in, and as he was about to walk into the hellfire, he turns around, he looks at Allah, and then he puts himself in the hellfire. Third person comes in, and Allah says, He commands him to be thrown into the hellfire. This man says, I don't want to be thrown in. He runs into the hellfire. Okay, so then Allah asks all 3 of them what they did. And He goes, the first one, He says, why were you kicking and screaming and saying you did nothing wrong? And the man repeated himself, said, I did nothing wrong. And Allah says, you are arrogant, you will remain here for all of eternity. He goes to the second man. He says, why did you walk in? And as you were walking, you turned behind to look at me. And he said, as I was walking in, I turned around hoping that you would have mercy on me. And Allah said, because you had that hope in me, I will put you in the first place of Jannah, the first level of Jannah. Took him out of hellfire. Then he went to the third man. He said, why did you run? He said, for the first time in my life, I wanted to do as you asked. And he said, because of that sacrifice, because you were willing to condemn yourself for eternity, I will put you in the highest level of Jannah. So, this story always kind of affected me quite a bit. And it shows that, Allah's mercy is for everyone. But when we're talking about mercy, people don't really understand what mercy is. They think mercy is just forgiving people, regardless of the fact that they've done wrong. That's the gist of it, but there's more to mercy than that. Mercy requires repentance. Mercy requires that the person who has done the wrong actually feels like they've done wrong, that they're looking for that mercy. But if they believe they don't need mercy, if they believe they've done nothing wrong, how can they receive that? And let me give it to you like this. If you're a judge and somebody comes up to you, they murdered somebody, and they admitted to murdering somebody, and you say, how do you feel? Do you regret your decision? They say, no, I do it again. Are you going to let them back on the street? That would be stupid, right? Because that's like they're taking advantage of you. They want you just to let them go. That's not mercy. That's stupidity. Okay, that has nothing to do with mercy. Because even the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, you would say a parent's love for their child is one of the highest forms of mercy, right? But he said, even if Fatima, my daughter, had stolen something, I would have her hand cut. Right?
Bro, that's harsh.
No, listen. Because the justice, remember, listen. Just because you feel partial to someone, okay, does not necessitate that you have to get rid of your principles, right? Mercy is not just about forgiveness. It's about it's about somebody reciprocating that. It's about accepting that mercy. It's about understanding what justice is. It's about understanding so many other things. And when we say that Allah has to forgive everyone, He has to because He's all merciful. You don't understand Allah's mercy. You do not understand Allah's mercy. How can you have mercy? That's not mercy. To just forgive just to say, oh, you can do whatever you want. It's okay. Just, I'll send you to Jannah anyway. You are devaluing the people who didn't do anything, the people who actually tried. But how is that being merciful to them? Why did they have to go through so many struggles and tests to prove themselves? But this person, he can murder and slaughter and do whatever he wants, reject Allah, reject His purpose in life, reject the whole origin of morality itself, and just get away with it. What's the purpose of even bothering to follow God then?
But I'm a nice person.
Are you?
My mom says so.
Okay. That's besides the point. So we're talking about, okay, so if you want to argue...
How can God get hurt? I didn't get,
Well, God's not hurt at all. Jannah and Jahannam are not for Allah. That's nonsense. I mean, He doesn't need that. But, if you're going to deny your purpose, if you're going to deny the very being that gave you morality itself, if you're going to, pardon my, bluntness here, if you're going to give the metaphorical middle finger to this being when you meet him, knowing that where your destination is, can you really feel any sympathy for this person? Come on. Who in their right mind, and if they're insane, of course they're excused, but who in their right mind, as a sane person, would do that? Standing in near hellfire, facing your Creator and saying, I didn't do anything wrong. That person doesn't deserve sympathy. Screw them. Seriously. Who cares? What person, how arrogant do you have to be? I have no mercy. I have no sympathy for that person. I don't understand why you do.
Because my mom told me I'm a nice person.
All right.
I'm nice.
So, and it's part of my forwardness. But honestly, I feel intellectually insulted that anyone would ask me why this person deserves to be in hellfire for eternity when they've made that decision themselves. I don't care. Go ahead.
Your prophet drank camel pee.
Okay.
Yeah. So
You're talking about this particular hadith? I don't think you drank it in the hadith, but...
Okay, look. So in this hadith,
okay.
The hadith referred to, I'm going to pull it up real quick.
Yeah.
The hadith referred to by the questioner is a sahih hadith in which it says that some people came to Medina and fell sick. The Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, told them to drink the milk and urine of camels, and they recovered and grew fat.
Okay.
Isn't camel pee, it's also in Bukhari and Muslim.
So why is this a problem to you?
Because camel pee is disgusting. What kind of
Alright,
would
so let's
camel pee
assume, so the scholars approach this in two different ways. So let's assume, for the sake of argument, okay, that it's unhygienic, which generally it is. Today we know that if you drink camel urine, it's not exactly a good thing to do. It's just not hygienic to drink any sort of refuse from any sort of animal or eat any refuse from any sort of animal. Okay, let's just agree upon that, all right? Modern medicine has replaced any sort of traditional remedies, all right? Well, this is interesting because the scholars approached the prophetic or the Prophet Muhammad's standards of or understanding of medicine and matters in the dunya in various ways. So there's also a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, in Sahih Muslim, where he's passing a group of date farmers. I don't know if you're familiar with this hadith. And he tells the date farmers, you guys should sort of manually pollinate these date trees, through some sort of method. And they kind of disagreed. They kind of were skeptical at first. And they said, okay, we'll do it because you're the prophet, so we'll pollinate these date trees. All right. And so they didn't have a very good yield that year. It was actually a bad yield.
So he's not a prophet.
Listen,
Told you.
we're not done. So then they came to the prophet and they complained. They said, you told us to do this, and look what happened. Our farm didn't turn out very nice. And the prophet, because you found him, said something very, very clear and very specific to them. He said, look, when I say something from a religious perspective, you take it as absolute. The other stuff is my opinion. He literally said this. This is Sahih. This is a Sahih hadith. Okay. So a lot of scholars interpreted from this that when it came to religious matters specifically, or when he said he was speaking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or if he was giving some sort of inspiration, that of course has had to be accepted all the time. But when it came to other matters, like whether it be architecture or military strategy, etc., it was really his personal opinion, and it had no, impact upon his prophethood. Okay, there were even many times in the Sirah where he received advice from his companions during wartime, during battles and things like this. So in that respect, the reason I bring this up is if this bothers you, if you're saying, well, the prophet's not good with medicine, then, well, who cares? Because many of the scholars themselves said, well, that's not what makes him a prophet. So let me just say that you shouldn't have that concern to begin with. Now, another school of thought, or another interpretation of this hadith, is that it was a very specific situation to those individuals. Okay, so it did work for those people, but it's not to be universalized. So, for example, he said only for those particular travelers that worked, and it was a matter of Allah inspiring him just for those particular people, and some sort of, I don't know, that urine had somehow some chemical properties that helped cure their illness at the time. Of course, that's not even the point of the hadith. It was supposed to be another message behind it. But so those are the two approaches you can take. So if you're really worried about these sort of things, let me just be clear again. Once again, his infallibility has nothing to do with his worldly knowledge. It never did. There are a lot of Muslims today who think it does, and that's causing a lot of problems in the Muslim world. Okay, because the Prophet was only prophetic in the sense that Allah gave him particular knowledge. But if Allah didn't give him scientific knowledge, then why are you concerned about when he says things regarding science or medicine or whatever? Okay? That's really how we should be approaching it. It shouldn't be any concern. If you're concerned about camel urine, if that's the basis of whether you leave Islam or not, or you still stay with Islam, then you have more problems than that. Because there's a lot in Islam that has nothing to do with our aqidah. It has nothing to do with being a Muslim. If that's what you're searching for, then I'd say that there's something else wrong. Because I personally don't understand why that's an issue.
Would you drink camel urine?
No, I would not.
Not usually.
Sometimes.
Next question. Yeah, I have another challenge for you.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the Prophet, he said he went on the Isra and Mi'raj. So he said that he went on a unicorn up to the 7 heavens, and he met everyone and people who were dead, and then he said he came back.
All right.
So what's that about?
Unicorn.
Pegasus.
Where do you get Pegasus?
I mean, a unicorn, it doesn't have wings.
I don't
but
understand this
Pegasus
whole
has
flying horse thing. I don't think it's even referred to as a flying horse in the hadith, right? It's referred to as a creature specifically made by Allah. I find this really fascinating. It's like we have all this technology now where we have rockets that can go into space and things like this, and we think about traveling to distant universes, and we think that's perfectly rational. But Allah makes a creature that can go to heaven, and all of a sudden it's a big deal. like you're talking about the omnipotent creator of all existence. You know, why not? You know, if you want to be a unicorn, sure, I don't care. But you know, I don't think that's the description. Anyway, so I think Abu Bakr gave the best response to this when he was asked about this. Somebody approached him and they asked him, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, had mentioned that this occurred, his companions believed him immediately, and then somebody was kind of skeptical, and they came up and said to Abu Bakr and said, do you really believe that this happened? Same question as you're giving me right now. And Abu Bakr gave a very beautiful response. He said, I believe something even more extraordinary than this. I believe that he is a prophet from Allah. And what's fascinating about that response is that it actually tells us a lot about how we're supposed to understand reality, not just religion, but reality in general. Today we live in a very, I wouldn't say scientific society, actually that's an incorrect way of putting it, because most people are ignorant of science. We claim to be scientific people, but our understanding of science is abysmal.
What's abysmal?
Abysmal, just horrendous, horrible, just nonsensical.
Very bad.
Just very bad. So, you know, we claim to be a scientific society, you know, but most people don't really understand what science is, how it operates. You know, we have a very absolutist understanding of scientific knowledge. You know, we think everything coming from a scientific journal is absolute fact. We read something in Time magazine or something. Oh, the newest scientific discovery says that drinking wine can be healthy for you at times. 2 years later, drinking wine is poisonous for you. You should not drink it anymore. That's actually happened recently. I don't know if you saw that. A recent report came out saying even drinking a little bit of wine is not really a good idea. I'm not saying that I'm not trying to bash science, by the way. I'm a big science enthusiast. One of my specialty was philosophy of science. But you know, we live in this society where we want all of these proofs, you know, from a scientific perspective. But in reality, humanity doesn't act that way. We don't believe that way. In fact, even our understanding of science is not believing that way. What I mean to say is, like, let's say, for example, who in here believes in morality?
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Can you give me a scientific peer-reviewed paper that proves the existence of morality? Okay, how about human rights? Does that exist?
Yeah.
Do rights exist? Do people have rights? Why? I don't see any scientific evidence for that. How about political theories? How about values? How about purpose? How about art and beauty? How about everything that makes you a human being? 90% of the things that you and I believe in on a daily basis that makes us function in the world as people has no scientific basis. Amazing. You know? And yet we're still here. Wow.
How do we know that he wasn't dreaming?
How do you know well, let me get to that point. So what I'm trying to get to is that certain beliefs that we hold, especially within the religion or even outside of it with other ideas, you know, are based not on direct evidence that that thing is the case. Most of you in here, actually all of you in here, let me just make it, have never seen that the earth is round. We haven't.
So it is flat.
But you believe it because why? Because the data, or what is being told to you, seems coherent to your experience. And that's really how we believe things. We believe it based on coherency. So, for example, most of the things we believe are not directly empirically observable. So, in the case of Abu Bakr, that's actually what he was affirming there, is that sort of understanding of epistemology or theory of knowledge. In that it was so easy for him to believe that that occurred because he already believed something else that made that rational. Do you understand? There was a foundational belief that he had. He already believed, based on other reasons, that the prophet was a prophet and that Allah could give him this, but it wasn't like extraordinary for him in the least. How was that extraordinary? This guy is talking to God. Like, you know, of course he probably went up to heaven. It's not a big deal. You know what I mean? That's nothing. Of course he met a unicorn. Or some sort of creature. You believe in Allah, you believe that he's the prophet of Allah. Why not? That's not an extraordinary belief. It's only extraordinary to people who already deny those foundations. So like when you're talking to an atheist, for example, they're going to laugh about this, be like, oh, you believe in this, that he went up to the heavens and stuff? It's like, yeah, I do. And they laugh at you. But the reason they're laughing is not because what you think is actually ridiculous. The reason they're laughing is because they already think the foundational beliefs that make that rational are ridiculous. So when you want to convince an atheist, by the way, you should never start with this stuff. You first need to convince them that God exists and that the prophet is the prophet. Then this stuff doesn't enter their minds. It's not nonsensical. Our background beliefs are what make something look rational or not rational. Okay? Yes, sir? So,
No, I was just going to ask, what's the background belief for human rights then?
for human rights,
Yeah.
humanism.
I just asked.
Well, but rights themselves, I mean, sorry to go on a little bit of a quick tangent. Rights themselves, natural rights came prior to humanism. Like individuals such as Thomas Aquinas within the Christian tradition, Catholic, came up with the concept of natural, didn't come up with it, but he elucidated them further from Aristotelian philosophy. You had individuals, even within the Islamic tradition, Ibn Rushd, Ibn Hazm, who talked about natural rights. So, and in fact, natural rights have a very theistic, or people who believe in God, background behind them. Humanism sort of took from that, and hasn't really provided what I consider to be a proper metaphysical foundation for what rights are. But that's a completely different discussion. Sorry.
Yeah, I got another one.
Yeah.
Why did the Prophet Muhammad...
We're done.
No, so why did he buy and sell slaves? Okay, isn't that evil?
Buying and selling slaves.
Even like
This is a very controversial subject.
even
Professor Brown got in trouble for this a couple of months ago. He was giving an academic lecture on the nature of slavery, and some Islamophobes came out and completely decontextualized his comments to make him seem like he wants to have slaves. And we had to go through a long period of trying to remarket him and attack these erroneous claims. He's now since recovered from that slander, and he went on to write a 400-page book on slavery, which he completed in 3 months. Professor Brown is a workaholic. Anyways, so this is going to be a long answer because I need to kind of go into some details. Same one with the Aisha one. But I have to ask you guys a question first. And you're going to probably be like, oh, okay. What is immoral about ownership? That's the first thing. I'm not trying to justify it. I just want to ask that question. What is immoral about ownership, per se? Yes.
It makes one human being seem have less rights than another human
Less
being.
rights than other people. Well, in fact, so let me define ownership first. It just means to have control over an individual. That's it. Okay, that's the general definition. Now, how that's manifested itself throughout time with regard to human beings has been called slavery. Okay, and there are some individuals, for example, in this room who have, or everyone actually, who has a particular image of what slavery is. Okay, especially if you come from a particular ethnicity or a particular cultural background, you're going to understand that slavery in a very negative sense, and you have every right to do so because it was immoral. That said, there have been other manifestations of this institution that do not mimic anything in your mind whatsoever. Literally. Like, I'm not even joking. So we don't even have to talk about Islamically. Okay, and by the way, I haven't given my answer yet. I'm just still trying to give you some background, all right? Many cultures have practiced it in different ways. So even the Europeans had a form of slavery that was more like what they call indentured servitude, which was nothing like what we call chattel slavery today. So the reason I said all that is because I want to give background that there are various manifestations of this, and that not all of them were necessarily loaded with certain negativities, and that they were practiced for various reasons. Okay, so that's a concise background there. Moving into this, when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was given his mission, he entered a world where the institution of slavery was global. It was a natural institution within society everywhere.
So why didn't he abolish it?
Hold on. So within Islamic theology and Islamic law, one of the greatest things that you can do, not only for the remission of your own sins, but also for just gaining benefits in the afterlife, is to free a slave. Okay, so the Prophet, peace be upon him, already came with these injunctions to free slaves. Now, as to why the entire institution was not abolished, there are certain reasons for that. Now, in Islam, it neither condones nor outright condemns the institution. There are just hints behind the fact that there are negativities to being enslaved, okay? Which is why we had some certain laws where it was allowed to free them in order to, compensate for something or for the remission of your sins. So it's implied that there's something negative about it. But the reason that the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions, had slaves and still practiced that institution, generally speaking, was because many scholars have come to the conclusion, modern scholars have come to the conclusion that to abolish the entire practice at one time would have caused massive chaos in the society in which it was practiced. So, and what I mean by that is not just economic chaos, but in terms of the slaves themselves, not having any position in society, not being able to even take care of themselves whatsoever. And it also would have destroyed another part of the institution that a lot of people don't talk about. So to give you another background to this, prison system is a relatively new concept. I don't know if you realize this, but the contemporary prison system that we have is relatively new. Prior to prison, slavery was an option. That was prison for a lot of cultures that could not have that particular institution, okay? That was their form of prison, was to enslave people and keep them in bondage just to make sure that they would give back to society sort of through their own work. Okay, and then eventually either be released or whatever through their own ethic. All right. So that was a form of prison for them, to keep prisoners, bound in some way. If you let these people go, they're going to come back and fight you. So you're either going to kill them or take them somehow, right? So they didn't really have anything other. They can't make these huge concrete buildings and start getting people to pay taxes and stuff in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, one building for 20 years.
Yeah, leave them there. We can talk about the morality of prison later. I agree with you with your sentiment there. But anyways, actually, prison to me is a form of slavery today. Okay, whether you consider it just or not is a different question, but it is, in my opinion, based on if you contextualize it in the way that slavery has been practiced in the past, prison is a form of slavery. There are even work prisons. There are people behind bars working in a prison for the state. I don't know if you want to I don't know how you don't call that slavery, but okay. Of course, people will argue, well, there's purchase and other things like this, but we can discuss that later as well. So anyways, back to the whole context. So having destroyed this establishment immediately would have caused immense problems for that society and for society in general. So a lot of scholars today claim that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was a gradual abolitionist. Basically, he put in certain rules and regulations where it was a positive thing to free people, and at the same time, he put in regulations to treat your slaves properly as individuals, as people who deserve rights. So, for example, he said that whatever your master eats, the slave has to eat as well. Whatever the master wears, the slave also has to wear. So he wanted to equalize them to the extent where then the slave was not treated in the same context as we understand slavery. You understand? So it would only became a legal institution in the sense that that person was considered owned, but at the same time they could not be abused. Like, for instance, you're not allowed to slap your slave, because if you slap them across the face, then they can be freed. You're not allowed to rape your slave. You're not allowed to do a lot of things to your slave. So how we can compare this to what, for example, American institution of slavery only a couple hundred years ago, or even 100-something years ago, is, I think, a miscategorization. So I would say, to be frank, just to be concise here, Islam is actually opposed to slavery, but it did not immediately abolish it as a result of the fact that the conditions that it would have produced will be killed and your women and children enslaved, or you can convert. Remember that passage in the Quran, there's no compulsion in religion. They were being judged by their own laws. So they had two options. They can either be judged by their own laws, which they believed in, or they could become Muslims and escape that fate completely. They all decided to follow their own laws. So all of the men were killed, and their women and children were taken, based upon their own ethical standards.
Why did the Prophet just
There's no compulsion in religion.
So, can you explain why I laughed?
No, don't.
Okay, so when you said there's no compulsion in religion, people tend to use this as like you can't force someone to convert, or you can't force someone to rule by Islamic law, right?
Yeah.
So these people, they rather than choosing Islamic law, they chose their own.
No, that was the default. That was their own laws. That's what they wanted. If they thought they were absurd, then why did they follow them? They sealed their own fate.
So the Prophet didn't force them to abide by their own scriptures.
That's what I'll force them to abide by their own laws. Okay, so they could violate them if they wanted to.
Okay.
That's why they were given the option. They were told, look, we can either become Muslim, and then we can just get all this happen, or we can judge you based on your own laws. What do you want to do? I can't just leave you alone, because you're probably going to kill me again. They're trying to kill me and my family and all the people that I love. Or we can take care of this right here and now. So what do you want? You want to, because I know you're not going to conform to this treaty. So it's either going to be A, you become Muslim, and we can trust you, or B, we judge you based on your own legal regulations, which you agreed to, by the way, in the treaty, that we wouldn't impose our laws upon you, that we would only judge you based on your own laws. So what do you want?
By the way, people, I know it's 8 o'clock, we're going to run till 8:30.
So you're probably also wondering, okay, well, what other options were there? You tell me. What other options were there? What other options were there? Okay, what happened when they let them,
And they start sending support to other
they sent armies over to start slaughtering the Muslims. We're not talking, this is not the United Nations, everyone. These are tribal politics. These people were willing to slaughter you and your entire tribe if you didn't do anything. Okay? Now, let me ask you what's more fair. Let's say in a contemporary context. Say that we're allied with a nation. Okay? And that nation decides, hey, I'm going to break the treaty, and you're at war with somebody, I'm going to come in and I want to kill innocent people and stuff. You give them so many chances, okay? Now, I could just go over there and just completely destroy their nation and completely, obliterate it and force them all to convert and all this other stuff to make sure that, there's nothing to worry about. Maybe massacre every single one of them. Okay. Or, I could be fair. I could say to them, look, what do you want? Here's my emissary. You tell me who should judge. Should the Prophet judge or should this guy judge? This guy's a former Jew. He knows your own laws. You pick. Then they pick that guy. What am I supposed to do? I gave you the option. I told you, you can either go by my laws, which said you have to become Muslim to do so, or you go by your own laws. Which do you prefer? Is that fair? Or unfair? I'd say it's pretty fair, considering the circumstances. I'm willing to give you a chance. I'm willing to let all of this go if you follow my laws and stop breaking all these treaties and stuff. Because it's the only way that I can guarantee you're not going to do it. Or, you want to follow your laws so badly? Okay. Which do you prefer?
Well, the Quran is misogynist.
What?
So in Surah number 2, verse number 282, it says that in Desc, the ruling is to have either 2 men witness a financial transaction, or to have 1 man and 2 women.
Okay.
So does this imply that women are less trustworthy or less competent in general? Yes. Why?
So you just mentioned the specific context here of that particular passage. That passage revealed a particular context with regard to women at the time were not normatively part of the business. Khadija was an exception. Khadija and other women around her were very much an exception to this rule at the time. So that particular ruling was revealed in respect to those business transactions or market transactions in general. That said, there's a hadith that seems to be more explicit than that. You mentioned it, which I'd like to discuss in more detail, because I think that's more of a problem.
Okay, I'll do that one.
Okay, yeah.
Narrated Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. Once Allah's apostle went out to the Musalla to offer prayer, or Eid al-Adha or al-Fitr prayer. Then he passed by the women and said, "O women, give alms." Like, give charity. As I have seen that the majority of the dwellers of hellfire were you women. They asked, "Why is this so, O Allah's apostle?" They replied, "You curse frequently and are ungrateful to your husbands. I have not seen anyone more deficient in reason and religion than you. A cautious, sensible man could be led astray by some of you." The woman asked, "O Allah's apostle, what is deficient in our reason and religion?" He said, "Is not the evidence of two women equal to the witness of one man?" They replied in the affirmative. He said, This is the deficiency in her reason. Isn't it true that a woman can neither pray nor fast during her menses?" The woman replied in the affirmative. He said, "This is the deficiency in her religion." Bukhari,
Okay.
deal with that.
Yeah, right. I'll
Deal with that.
So first off, a lot of people love this hadith. Like a lot of ex-Muslims love this hadith because it seems to generalize all of it. And what's interesting about that hadith is that it's actually, and I'm not blaming the translation necessarily. I just want to be very clear about certain words that are used in the hadith. It's not actually very general at all. So, for example, that hadith, it mentions when the Prophet peace be upon him was talking to these women. He says, can you repeat the first response? It says, just to be clear one more time.
He passed by the women and said, "O women, give alms, as I have seen that the majority of the dwellers of hellfire were you women."
Okay, so the majority of dwellers of hellfire were you women, but the word women is not in the Arabic. It's just not there. It's in parentheses in all the translations of women. So it acts like though you is referring to the gender women or the sex woman, but it's you. The Arabic is just you. So he passed by these women, and he said the majority of the people in hellfire are you. Okay, so he's talking about not their gender. He's talking about specific attributes that they have. So those particular types of women. He goes on to mention the deficiency in their intelligence. He didn't say intelligence, it says reasoning, which means just being able to rationalize specific things. So it doesn't mean your IQ. The hadith has nothing to do with your intelligence. Okay, so it has to do with your ability to understand particular things, to comprehend particular things. So this is in reference to the markets and things like that. So he said you're deficient in that sense, and then he goes on to say deficient in religion because of the menses and things like this, right? So he's talking specifically about these particular women that were in the market, or that were or around the masjid, which is also near the marketplace, by the way, who had particular traits regarding how they treated their husbands. Because notice how he's very specific there. He says, notice how you treat your husbands. Like you are very ungrateful. Obviously, not every woman on planet Earth is ungrateful to their husband. Okay, so he's talking about these particular women. So, like I said, once again, when he says you, it's not their gender. He's specifying. He's specifying a certain subgroup within that larger identity. Okay, so that this hadith always gets taken out of context because you is assumed to be the universal declaration for all women, which is nonsense. That's not the case. And we know this too based on the practice of the companions themselves after the Prophet, and even also the Prophet's practice. But let's mention one particular one. So Umar bin Khattab, one of the caliphs, the righteous caliphs of Islam, He had a woman oversee the market. An elderly woman oversee the market as the person who advocated between sellers and buyers. So if there was a problem in the market, this woman, I forgot her exact name, I'm really sorry, so I'll have to look that up later, to oversee the matters in the marketplace. So she was an exception to the rule, right? If it was all about all women, then why would she even be in that position to begin with? And likewise, because and Omar was also what we consider to be the most literalistic of the caliph, so why would he knew about this hadith, right? He knew what the Prophet said, right? If it was all about women, why would he put this woman as the head of the marketplace, right? So that was very specific, very specific. And this is not even apologetics or anything like that. You can look this up. Classical scholars have noted this. This is not all women. So regarding the two witnesses too, let's look at fiqh, or even in the Quran. Just look in the Quran. When a woman is accused of adultery by her husband, does she require another woman to oppose him? There is a specific instance the Quran mentions, okay, if a husband suspects his wife of committing zina, he can go to the authorities and say, my wife committed zina. But if she says, I didn't do it, then they can't do anything. So if it requires two women to be witnesses, if the value of a woman's testimony was really half of a man's, why does her testimony cancel out her husband's? No? Yes?
The lady's name is Al-Shifa bint Abdullah.
Thank you. So yes, she exists. Do not make that up. Thank you. I appreciate it. Also, in cases of rape, scholars are very explicit about this as well. Do you need witnesses to prove rape? Why? A woman comes and says she's been raped. Shouldn't she need another woman next to her to remind her that she was raped? Makes no sense, right? What is she reminding? What is she being reminded of? Specific context related to the marketplace, related to something that was not normative for women back in that period of time. The ruling is very specific. Because if it was true across the board, why does the Quran say that a woman's testimony by herself is sufficient in other areas? Makes no sense. Yes, please.
What about the second half of that hadith that refer to specific characteristics of women rather than of their own attributes, such as being like ungrateful to husbands? Because it mentions them not being able to pray or fast when they're on their. So how does that
rejoinder to them specifically? Is a rejoinder to them specifically. So the first quality that's mentioned is their ungratefulness. That's what he's attacking them for. Then they ask him a question. They ask him, how are we deficient or lacking? The actual word is lacking here in these respects. And then he gives them evidence from the Quran in this regard. But the evidence itself, what's being used to justify the statement that they're lacking, is not connected to the first judgment. Does that make sense? The reason they're in hellfire is not because of necessarily deficiency or the lacking thereof. The reason they're in hellfire is because, as he makes it clear, is because of their behavior towards their husbands. That's what he was specifically referencing as the reason why they were being punished. So that other part, the other half, is actually almost a different discussion, but a different part of the discussion. Does that make some sense, or?
Yes, but still the reasons for them being lacking are now universally applicable to half of the human population. That's for any woman.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Okay, let's say I have a company. All right, I walk in, I see my employees, right? And I say to them, you guys are all going to be fired. Okay, all of you. Every man in here is going to be fired. You men are going to be fired because you don't do your jobs. All right? You don't do your jobs. You're real lazy. Okay? And then you tell me, okay, and I say something about you lacking initiative. Right? So you say, well, how do we lack initiative? And I say, you lack initiative, you men, you lack initiative because of A and because of B. Or I say something like, oh, you don't get up on time. You men don't get up on time. And you men don't do this. You men don't do this. All right? Now, is that statement itself, okay, is that necessarily applied to every man on planet Earth? Now, well, I understand what you're about to respond with, by the way, because you're saying, well, women commences and things like this, right? But is that quality, is the Quran itself say that these women are lacking because of those things, or is the Prophet saying that they are specifically lacking because of these things? Do you see you see the distinction? No. You don't see the distinction? Okay, does the Quran itself say that women are lacking in their religious faith because they have menses? No. The Prophet is telling them they are lacking because of their menses. Okay? That they are lacking in their religious, in some way in religion, because of their menses. In what way is he telling them that? Like, do you understand what I'm trying to get at here?
It sounds like it's very semantic.
It's not semantic.
It sounds like it's, maybe I'm not understanding the full picture of it. But
Okay, so if I'm trying to make a rejoinder,
sure.
if I'm trying to counter you with something, say if you're arrogant and you're, I'm not saying you, I'm just saying, that somebody is arrogant. Like these women are ungrateful to their husbands, and they think they're all hot and everything like this, and they think that they're the best, right? I'm not saying hot physically, I'm just saying they're like this awesome stuff, right? And I come at you and say, guess what? You're lacking, okay? You're lacking in your religion and your reasoning because of these reasons. So don't think that you are the greatest thing that there is. Is that lacking necessarily me trying to say that women are somehow lower? Or am I saying, I'm trying to remind those people that you aren't everything that you think that you are. Here are some things that you are limited with respect to your position. Do you see what he's not trying to insult them. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Does that make some sense? I'm trying to give you a common example with the employee thing. I tried. I don't know if that was a proper analogy even, but the lacking is not meant to be an insult. Okay, because we don't consider a woman who has her menses to be less religious than a man. The Quran very specifically says that a man and a woman can both vie for righteousness in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're equal in that sense. So this is not the Prophet contradicting that statement. He's telling them specifically, like, do not think yourself higher than your husbands. You do not have this, and you do not have this. Does that kind of make sense? Or?
It does make a little bit more sense.
Okay, the tone is not being expressed in the hadith. That's the problem, maybe. The tone is not being expressed explicitly in the hadith. Alright. I'm trying to find a better way maybe to say that.
You guys want to do like a poll, however, of how many people get it? Okay, hands up if you guys get it.
Well, not see the men get it, obviously. So obviously the men get it, right? So, but the women are like, it's not going to pass with me, right? So go ahead.
So are you saying that he was trying to bring them down a notch?
He was trying to make them humble.
By saying that you're just reminding them of
Reminding
some things
them
that they don't
that they don't necessarily possess in comparison to their husbands. He was actually doing that because those two things are only in contrast to men, to those men. Okay, so you can't pray all the time because you have your menses. Okay, whereas your husbands are praying all the time. All right, your husbands run the businesses, whereas your testimony in this respect is deficient. Do you understand?
So you're not the best at everything. It's kind of
He was trying to bring them to the same levels because they were ungrateful to their husbands. They were looking down on their husbands.
Okay.
You understand that he was trying to contrast, trying to say that, look, you are not better than them. Right? You have limitations like they do. Okay, do not sit here and look down upon your husbands.
So they thought they were better than their husbands.
Yes, that's why they were
trying to
ungrateful
bring
to
them
them.
down.
Yes, that's what he
Okay.
was trying to do. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to be semantic. I understand where you're coming from. It was hard for me to convey because there's a tone there that's being expressed. There's a specific tone. Okay. Remember, he's passing these specific women. He didn't just go, MSA. You are deficient. Okay. That's not what he did. He was talking to those girls because they needed to be rebuked for their behavior. He knew that they were degrading their husbands. All right, that's how bad it was. And there are other specific instances in this respect as well. Another hadith where it talks about certain women from Quraysh who were very disrespectful towards their husbands, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, had to remind them of certain things about who their husbands were in comparison to them. So there are some cases where he actually references their husband's strength physically. He says, remember, they can't do something to you, but they could. So please treat them with, the same respect as they try to treat you with. And he was kind of warning them, like, look, they don't have to be like this. Okay, they're doing this because of Islam, they're doing this because of their values and stuff. So, have some respect for them as they have respect for you. Don't demean them and think that they're weak because they're being restricted from doing things. Remember what happened prior to Islam. They were burying you alive. So, show some respect for who your husbands are now. You know what I'm trying? That's some of the things that he would say to some of these women. Because when Islam came, not all of the women, but certain women took advantage of this to kind of not do revenge, but kind of to lord over their husbands. Like, oh, you can't beat me now. You can't do this to me. Like, you can't divorce me when, for no, you can't abuse me basically and take advantage of me. You can't. So now I'm going to do this to you because I know you can't retract. You can't fight me back. And so the Prophet had to come and say, look, remember where you used to be and who this man used to be. Don't overstep your boundaries. Does that make sense? So that's what he was trying to level the playing field, as it were. Okay.
Isn't it true that when Muslims blow themselves up, they get 72 virgins in heaven?
Blow themselves up. Okay,
Yeah.
72 versions.
Yeah, I deal with that.
Why is it a problem, by the way?
Is it?
I don't know. Is it a problem? Tell me, why is it a problem? I just want to know. I just want to know why everyone has an issue with it. Just let me ask. I'm just
I was
asking.
hoping for 75.
75.
Is it like, I guess the question, was it fair for the wives?
Oh, is it okay? Can we say is it misogynistic or something? Is that probably what we're referring here? That it's wrong for men to have.
I think it's the suicide itself, suicide killings.
Okay, well I think that was just. I think that was just sensationalized.
Yeah.
No, there are some. I don't want to get into it, but let's just assume that there's a lot of women in the afterlife that men are supposed to give a bit more of themselves. Okay, let's just deal with the issue. All right, we can get the specifics of hadith later, but anyway. So the Quran is really beautiful in the sense that when it talks about what people want to achieve in the afterlife, it always expresses it in the most abundant of ways. So you're going to get this many trees, you're going to get this many houses, you're going to get this many this, and they're going to be huge and beautiful and without any consequences, etc. So, it's interesting that a lot of times the Quran emphasizes to men who fight the battle that the first thing that they're going to get are virgins in heaven. Okay? And a lot of people look at this and they're like, oh, that's disgusting. That's patriarchal and nonsense. But I want you to think about it from the context of a 7th century Arab. An Arab Muslim male. Okay? The most valuable thing to have for a Muslim man is a righteous spouse. Now imagine that multiplied. For them, virginity was not necessarily about sex. It was a label of chastity, of purity, of belonging to only one person. It's like, this is mine, right? Nobody else has ever had contact, intimacy with this individual. Okay, this is only meant for me. And then multiply. So the Quran, the Prophet, others are trying to emphasize that the quantity of that which you desire the most in life. will be there. Okay, and the one thing that men desired most, Muslim men, was not because they just wanted to have sex all the time and everything, you know, these horrible things that we talk about companions. We always emphasize that they're these sexual monsters, you know, all they care about is women, you know. No. Because the most valuable thing to a Muslim male is a righteous woman. That is the most emphasized thing. The one thing that you can treasure more than anything else in your existence as a Muslim man is to have a righteous spouse and righteous children, righteous things like this, not material items. Those were emphasized after this. They were emphasized having all these palm trees and all these running rivers and things like this. Right? These were emphasized after that, but they were not in the same category. They were not material objects.
Someone please have objections.
No. Hold on. I want to be very clear here, because people will have this really messed up mentality that the reason that we mention women is just because of sex. Like that's all men care about. I'm sorry, but that's degrading to men. I'll make it very clear. That's very degrading to men. There are scientific studies today that when a man loses a wife or he breaks up, men take it harder than women do. That's why the male suicide rate is higher. Okay? When a man finds a woman that he cares about, he loves, and he's willing to give himself up to, that takes up most of his existence. A man does not work because he likes big houses and cars. A man works for the most part because he wants to give it all to his family. A man is willing to run in front of a bus and to protect his wife or his kids, not because I like doing this. You know, it's great. I don't get up every morning and go to work because I like to work. I get up every morning because I have to pay the bills. Why? Because my wife needs to be taken care of. If I could live in a cardboard box, I would. But I don't. A lot of things that I have, I give to my family. A lot of things that men work for generally, like most of their income goes to their family. A man dedicates his life to his family. I don't know who has immigrant parents here. I'm sure many of you do. But have you seen how your father, well, everyone has different situations, but most of you, have you seen how your parent, your mother, especially your father, I know people, a lot of the young men who tell me about their fathers who would literally, they'll have degrees over in some other country. They come over here and drive a taxi, you know, for years and years. They work like endless hours just to make sure that their wife and their kids are happy. They sacrifice every part of their being. When a man loves a woman, there is nothing else he will give anything else. I mean, that becomes his life. Okay? Just the same as when a woman has a child. All right? That everything is given to that child. All right? Men take heartbreak and they take companionship deeply, deeply personal. Yes, men can be all, think about sex all the time because psychologically people have proven this, okay? But when a man dedicates himself to a woman, there is no better loyalty. As far as I'm concerned. I'm a man, I know, I understand. Okay? But even in the animal kingdom, among mammals, males will sacrifice themselves instantly to protect everything. They don't care about their own lives. So when a man martyrs himself for the sake of Islam, and he's promised companionship in heaven after he gave up his family back home, and he goes into the desert for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, 2, 4, 5 years to fight against the disbelievers who are about to invade your land and kill your family, he better get some sort of promise in the afterlife, something that is going to replace or at least complement everything that he gave up. And when Allah tells these men, I'm going to give you righteous spouses in heaven when you die.
Allah, you made these 72 virgin men, or no, sorry.
I don't know what you're thinking. So my point, once again, and I'm sorry if I sound professional, I want to emphasize that, we live in this time period where men get a lot of flack too. We get told We're the root of all the problems in the world and things like this for women. And look, I get it. There are some really horrible men out there. There are horrible men out there. And there are sex-crazed men and, men who go around and rape and do horrible things. But what about the men, who don't do those things? What about the men who emphasize a different standard, who represent and manifest a different standard? And what are you saying about the companions when you mention this? They were some of the best men on this earth. They treated their wives like this. Do you honestly think that they wanted virgins in heaven because of sex? That when they were told that's what they were thinking. Oh yeah, I'm gonna have a lot of sex when I get to heaven. It's great. That's why I'm sacrificing my life right now in the middle of this desert because I want to have a bunch of sex. Honestly, it just doesn't. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make any sense at all that you would die for that, just for that. Come on, we're not machines that just want to do those things. We have feelings too. These men sacrifice so much of what they love and care about just to perform those acts, and they died in the middle of a desert, nowhere to be buried, nowhere to be commended for. Their families learned about their death several months later. Oh, by the way, your husband was killed in battle. I know you're expecting him back. He died for you, by the way. Allah may, reward him. You don't think about it from that angle? No, he's enjoying himself. He's fine. If I was in the middle of that, and I was scared for my life, and I didn't know if I was coming back to my family, and Allah came down and said, look, I'm going to give you all of this and more. Even in our Aqidah too, your wife, she goes up to heaven, she joins you, she becomes queen among all of them. And it's like, you get all of this. You're going to get all this reward. I know you're scared. But look at what you're going to achieve. I'm trying to calm you down. Allah is trying to tell you something. Like, look, you don't have anything to fear. I understand what you've sacrificed. You will gain everything because of it. How comforted would you be? Do you really think that these soldiers who were fearing for their lives in that moment were thinking, yeah, I'm going to get sex? I wouldn't enter my mind. That would be the last thing to enter my mind if I was about to die. Honestly. I would not be in the mood in that moment, okay? I'm just being frank with you, right? Would any male in here honestly be in the mood when they're about to face death? This guy's gonna cut my head off, but the girls, no. Okay? Go ahead.
Going back to the Benu Qurayza thing, the reason that they were fearful of them was because their women were all allocated in one area.
Yeah, all the women were behind the soldiers, so these men, these Banu Qurayza, were about to actually slaughter women and children. How angry would you be if you knew your entire family was about to be killed? And you still gave them the choice. You choose between your law, and we spared your women and children. Okay? In either case, we could have done the same to you, by the way, but we're going to let you choose. Yeah.
No, I'm pretty sure they were about to slaughter their own women and children.
That was actually discussed. That's not something they decided upon.
It was discussed.
They were discussed, but they said, we're not going to do it. But then they said to themselves, should we follow our own laws? And then they said, even though it's going to end in this way, and they said, yes, we will never join them. That was basically the rejoinder. So they were so proud of the fact that they were opposing, they didn't even care about their own kids. In fact, they weren't willing to kill them themselves because they were cowards, but at the same time, they didn't even care that this was going to happen to them. Okay? They were so proud of it, they were willing to go down with the ship. So that was a disgusting part about their leadership.
I think when they were discussing, they said, oh, the Muslims defeat you, and the Muslims will defeat you. Mm-hmm. That it will be said, your kids and your children were taken as slaves for the Muslims, so better just kill them now, I guess. Mm-hmm. It's a thought process of
It was, but it wasn't because they cared about them. That's the funny thing. It was because it was a form of humiliation.
What would be said about them?
Yeah, what's said about themselves. They were only concerned about what happened to their children and their lives and stuff based on if they would be humiliated in history. That was their only concern, what happened to them. That's how disgusting these individuals were. And that's why they were all the male soldiers, not the males, the children and the were left alone. But all the men soldiers were killed. Because that was their mentality. They didn't care. They were willing to slaughter man, woman, and child of the Muslim population. They're willing to give up their own if necessary, to save their own skin. And the only reason they cared about them was because it didn't look good on them. That was the mentality of this tribe that you're dealing with here. So, I don't know. It was an extreme situation. But the fact that the Prophet actually allowed them the choice to decide their own fate is unheard of in history. Like any other nation would have just completely wiped them off, regardless. So that's just something to consider. Anyways, did everyone get my explanation?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we cool now? We're good. Everyone's okay. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yes, sir.
We still going to have an open Q&A session? Or
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't mind.
No, but the thing is that formally, we're done.
Oh, we're done now?
I mean, formally.
We got another one.
I mean, I think I like Islam now.
Oh, really? That's good. Okay. Weird.